Hello folks, and welcome back to my channel, where today we will look towards the 2021 Formula One season. Testing has been and gone in the blink of an eye, so all we have now is to look back over those 3 days and try to figure out some semblance of who sits where. Thank you for your continued support of this channel. Thank you for hitting that subscription button, ringing that notifications bell so you will be the first to be aware of whenever we upload anything on this channel. Thank you for your comments, for your questions. As I say, I read every single one of them. And thanks to those of you who have been to the merch section and bought some merchandise. As I've said before, a percentage of every sale goes to charities both in the UK and the US. We have 2 stores, US and UK. So thank you for your continued support. Let's get on with looking towards the 2021 Formula One season, because we've got a lot of changes between 2020 and 2021. What was supposed to be a carryover season has nevertheless seen big changes. The cars were getting too fast, so they decided to reduce the downforce at the rear of the car by instigating new floor regulations. It was supposed to reduce downforce by about 10%, but the F1 brain trusts being that they are, the teams have managed to recoup the vast majority of it. And despite having a different construction, harder Pirelli tyres for this season as well, Pirelli themselves are predicting that we will have new lap records by the end of the season. The car development was permitted between 20 and 21 using a token system. Each team had 2 tokens they could spend on their cars, some quite obviously, some still remain a little bit of a mystery. We've got one of the most substantial driver lineup changes in years, as Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Alfa Tauri, Haas, and the newly branded Alpine and Aston Martin teams all feature new driver lineups. We have a budget cap to take into consideration as well, and all new regulations for 2022. So let's have a look at where I think the teams sit after those 3 days of testing, and where we'll be when we get back to racing ways in Bahrain in just a few days' time. An underdeveloped car, which won't be worked on during the season, plus 2 rookie drivers, means that 2021 could be a very tough season indeed for the Haas Formula One team. And we haven't even got to lights out at the first race. The team has taken the decision to focus pretty much everything on the new regulations for 2022. So 2021 is already being seen as something of a sacrifice. They went well in testing in terms of reliability for the most part after some difficulties on the first day, but I don't think anyone is expecting them to be anywhere other than P19 and P20 come the end of qualifying in Bahrain. It's going to be a very, very tough year for the Haas F1 team. And while the team's livery and one of its drivers has courted some controversy, there is a good news story over one side of the garage in the form of Mick Schumacher, reigning Formula 2 champion, which will bring some positive column inches to the squad in what I'm sure will be a pretty difficult season for Haas. With the 6th most laps run and the 6th fastest time on the board in testing, it was a very positive pre-season for Williams, who under new ownership with Doralton Capital, a new CEO in Jost Capito, have a really bright and vibrant path ahead of them. Any suggestion that they're going to immediately jump back up into the midfield, I think is slightly wide of the mark. And that's because the team has admitted to taking a slightly different, controversial and ultimately risky approach to the year. They have focused their design philosophy around one specific type of track, meaning they are attempting to optimize their chances of scoring points at just 4 or 5 races in the year. When you look at 2020, it makes sense. Their nearest rivals, Haas and Alfa Romeo, both scored less than 10 points. If Williams can maximize those few opportunities to score points, it could pay dividends at the end of the year, putting them in 8th place in the Constructors' Championship, which would be huge for them after the disappointments of 2020. Get it wrong though, and the whole season is lost. As Paul McCartney once sang, there is a fine line between recklessness and courage. Williams have just got to hope that their bravery pays off. Next up, Alfa Romeo, who I think, honestly, had a really good test, a really positive start to the year. They may have made one of the biggest leap forwards of any of the teams in Formula One. They covered 421 laps in the test, the most miles of any team on the grid. On the final day, Kimi Raikkonen was 4th fastest, having completed nearly 3 race distances, not over the test, over just that one day. It was a really impressive showing from Alfa Romeo. There's been a lot of work on the car. Their token spend was on the front end, which meant that they actually had to move away from where Ferrari wanted them to, because they didn't take Ferrari's new transmission, which would have needed them to spend their token spend at the rear of the car. Everything points to them actually taking a step away from that rear of the midfield and stepping back in to that midfield fight. It's going to be fascinating to see how 2021 goes for Alfa Romeo. Okay, this is the bit where it all gets a little bit difficult, because honestly, the order from 7th to 3rd, and maybe even 8th to 3rd or 4th, I think is going to be interchangeable throughout the season. That midfield pack, if it was condensed last year, it's been squished even more over the winter between 2020 and 2021. I'm just going to have to use my best judgment from what I've seen on track, not just in terms of lap times, but the body language of the car on track and the body language of the drivers as well, and also what teams have told me in terms of who they see as their biggest rivals and their biggest threats for the 2021 season. So we're going to start, I'm afraid to say, in 7th with Alpine. Just 6 laps shy of 400 on the board for 3 days is a decent number of laps run. Their push lap pace though and their race sims didn't actually blow me away. The car looks fairly well together, but that bulbous engine cover is hiding the only power unit in the field that didn't have a substantial overhaul and upgrade over the winter. Save for Ferrari's difficulties in 2020, Renault has built the least desirable engine in the sport. And that's not an opinion, that's fact. They have no customers. You've got upheaval from the top of the organisation through to the top of the team in terms of who's actually running the show, at precisely the point where they needed stability. And how is that relationship between Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso going to play out? There are a lot of questions that hang over Alpine coming into this season. I think anything more than a Q2 appearance and lucky points in the early rounds would be seen as a success right now. In 6th place then, right now, it looks like Aston Martin, who had a troubled 3 days in Bahrain. They have got a tidy racing car. The Mercedes influence is clear, but they are far beyond the controversies of 2020. Yes, they've taken Mercedes suspension. Yes, they've taken Mercedes gearbox, as they are allowed to do as a customer team. But their token spend was on a brand new chassis. That car is every bit an Aston Martin. Calling it a green Mercedes, I think, is slightly wide of the mark. That said, there are similarities, and there are design traits which are similar, obviously, between last year's Mercedes and this year's Aston Martin. The low rake philosophy is one of those things and could be an issue for them. They're going to have to get on top of that Mercedes suspension and understand it quickly, as indeed they did last year as Racing Point, utilising what they were allowed to from their partnership, their relationship with Mercedes. The reason for that issue with the rake is that with the teams trying to get around this new floor regulation and the reduction in downforce at the rear, there is a line of thought that some level of rake, the angle of rake, lifting the rear of the car up, pointing it towards the front, is a beneficial way to make the most of these new regulations. Mercedes, and by extension Aston Martin, have utilised a low rake. So trying to see them get on top of that will be fascinating. As you said, the test wasn't without its problems either. On the first day, there was an electrical problem. Second day, there was a gearbox problem. Third day, there was a boost pressure problem, all seemingly affecting Sebastian Vettel, who said if he was a younger man, right now is the point at which he would begin to be worried about the season ahead. He didn't get to do a push lap at the end of that third day because the car was up on its jack, so we haven't really seen everything that it's capable of. But it's been a disrupted testing session, and they are somewhat on the back foot. When they fix that car, when they get it all together, I have no doubt that Aston Martin could be something sensational. But as things stand right now, just above Alpine in the overall very tight and compacted running order in the midfield. Okay, and now we move to the team that left testing for me 5th place in the overall competitive order, and that is Ferrari. They've made massive strides since last season, so if you are Tifosi, know this. The power unit has taken a massive step forward. All of the difficulties that they experienced in 2020 with obviously what went down at the end of 2019 have been overcome. It's hugely up on horses. It's back to being what a Ferrari engine should be. And while not perhaps the best in the field, it's no longer the worst. And that is massive. They've also critically got on top of their very draggy car, which they had last year. Both drivers reporting back positively on their feel in the car. And they've got over the correlation issues, which of course so blighted their recent championship runs. Long runs looked good. Low fuel runs looked good. All in all, I'd say it's been a good test. Why aren't they any higher? Well, the problem for Ferrari is they've got some very noisy neighbours. Okay, so maybe neighbours is a slight exaggeration. They are about an hour apart with Bologna slapped in the middle of them. But either way, Italy's top team, post-testing, looks for all the world to be Alfa Tauri. They've built a rocket ship. Like Aston Martin, they've taken everything that they could in terms of free customer upgrades, which includes Red Bull's revolutionary front suspension, which of course required that double bulkhead. But Alfa Tauri have been really smart and not used their token spend getting that onto the car. Instead, they have adapted last year's chassis. They've been really, really smart in how they've used the regulations, literally stretched them as far as they could in order to create this ATO2, which has got the entire paddock talking. There isn't a team in Formula One right now that isn't looking at Alfa Tauri and what they've done over the winter as being something a little bit special. Both Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda looked really comfortable in that car, and with a punchy Honda power unit in the back of it, it could hit the ground running. They had the second fastest time in testing, and sure, Yuki was banging on the DRS before he barely hit the apex of the corners, but the underlying pace in that car isn't just over one lap. Pierre Gasly's race runs, running at a similar time on track, and we believe on a similar fuel level to the likes of Ferrari and McLaren, look really impressive. Not only that, but the team seems to have got on top of the new Pirelli tyres, which take an awful lot of looking after on their warm-up lap for a quali lap, and then maintaining that temperature window on a long run. Not every team has got on top of it. Alfa Tauri appear to. I don't want to big them up too much too early, but right now, Alfa Tauri are looking seriously good. Getting up near the top now, and in 3rd place, McLaren. They were brilliant, bulletproof in testing. They ticked every box, got every job done with no major issues, no major complaints. They were quick, they were effective, they were fast, they were reliable. It's about as perfect a test as you could hope for. Daniel Ricciardo looks like he's been at the team forever. Lando has come back from the winter more focused, more channeled. Sure, the top times weren't there, but I don't think that matters when you look at the workload they've done and the quiet confidence that the team is taking out of their 3 days testing in Bahrain. What's astonishing here for me is that they had the most work to do over the winter. They're the only team that changed engine supplier, spending all of their tokens getting that Mercedes engine into the McLaren MCL 35M. And what was really smart about McLaren is they were looking towards this year way earlier in 2020. That nose is a 21 specific nose, but that's a token spend. So to get around it, they'd already raced it last year on their 2020 car, meaning they didn't have to spend a token on it. It was just a carryover from 2020 into 2021. Absolute genius, properly smart, as the team just seems to be taking these steps back towards being the competitive championship potential team that it always has been. I'm seriously excited about McLaren for 2021. They aren't just looking good, they're looking great. Podiums, I think, will be in their sights from the outset. A race victory on merit this year, right now, doesn't look completely stupid either. Second, and I can't remember the last time that I had these guys anywhere other than top of the pile going into a season, but Mercedes are second at the moment in terms of the overall competitive order. Actually, given the struggles that they had in pre-season testing, you could legitimately put them lower in the order than that, given some of the teams like McLaren, who had nigh on perfect 3 days in Bahrain. But Mercedes haven't forgotten how to win races. They haven't forgotten how to win a world championship. So I think it's disingenuous to put them any lower than second. Some people would argue they should still be first. But from what I've seen, from what I understand, and from what I've heard, the problems that they've got are real. Reliability was an issue for them in testing, but it wasn't just reliability. When that car was out on track, it did not look all together. It was sketchy, it was unstable, neither driver looked confident. And actually, when we talk about the drivers, it was Lewis Hamilton who looked the less confident of the two. The car's not happy, the drivers aren't happy. As we've discussed, there's a theory that in order to make the new floor regulations work to their optimum, you need to raise that rear ride height. You need to put an angle of rake on the car that Mercedes simply aren't used to running. It's giving them a headache. That's the theory, at least. It's a headache that, of course, we expect them to get on top of. They're Mercedes. But if they are having to forge a path that they have deliberately not taken in recent years, it is going to take them time to get to the top, to get to the best, and to get on top of what is creating a difficult situation for them. You also have to factor into the equation the fact that while they completed their run plan, they had to drastically reduce the number of laps they did on each run in order to do so. So their knowledge of the new tyres is not where they would like it to be. I don't believe it's all an act either. We saw a video from Mercedes earlier in this week with James Vales and Andrew Shovlin, and while very good on camera, I don't believe that either of them would win an Oscar for their acting. It's not an act. The concerns are real. Yes, they looked tired because they just crammed 2 weeks' work into 3 days, and I think got the 2 a.m. flight back from Bahrain to go into the office to make that video. But I can assure you that while everybody else was sleeping on that flight, they were scratching their heads trying to get on top of what on earth is going wrong with that car. Be in no doubt, Mercedes will be fast. They will be competitive. They will likely fight for the World Championship, but they do not enter 2021 as title favourites. All of which brings us to Red Bull Racing. The RB16B was planted from the very first lap on track. It looked phenomenal. The drivers had so much confidence, under braking, through the medium high speed stuff, through the low speed stuff. The car is as good a Red Bull as I've seen out of the box, probably in the turbo hybrid era. It just looks sensational. It was consistent on long runs. It was consistently at the top on the low fuel, high speed runs. It's just an outstanding looking car. The all new Honda Power Unit is the best they've ever produced, and might arguably, and we'll only know after a few races, but at the moment the perception is it could be the best engine in Formula One. The RB16B appears to have got over all of the aerodynamic foibles which had so affected its predecessors and led to Red Bull coming into seasons on the back foot. I can't at the moment see any area in which there's a negative. Sergio Perez has also integrated fantastically well into the team, and while he's asked people to give him time and up to 5 races to fully be at his best, from what we understand of the numbers, and obviously it's still a guessing game because you never know precisely who's running what when in testing, his numbers looked comparable to Max Verstappen on both short and long runs. In short, Red Bull looked the best that I've seen them in years, and for me, enter 2021 as absolute title favourites. So there we go. That is my rundown of who I see where. Bear in mind, it is just my opinion. Bear in mind, it is just from what we've seen at testing, and you never know the full computations of who was doing what when. But from what I've seen, from the people I've spoken to, that's where I see the running order as it is now. But of course, we are at the start of what will potentially be the longest Formula One season in history. There is an awful lot of time for everyone to make amends for the difficulties they may have encountered or experienced in pre-season testing, and to get on top of the inadequacies, shall we say, that they have encountered. Red Bull for me are the favourites, but Mercedes will be in the fight. I see a titanic battle for the World Championship between those two. I see McLaren fighting in there, not just at the lead of the midfield, but as I said, I see them potentially getting a race win on merit this year. That midfield itself will be tightly packed, maybe even with Alfa Romeo getting into the mix as well. Williams have taken a step forward, and for Haas, it's going to be a really, really hard year. Then there's the question, of course, of how these teams fare under the budget cap, and when a team switches its full focus, as Haas has already done, to its 2022 car. If one team consistently finds itself at the bottom of the pecking order in that midfield fight, when will they look to focus on 2022? Because finishing lower, of course, in the championship standings in 2021 will give them that increased wind tunnel and CFD time for future seasons. It's going to be a fascinating year. As I said, that's just my rundown, how I see it right now. Likely we'll all be proved wrong by the time we get to Bahrain in a few days' time. But for me, it's Red Bull who enter 2021 as the championship favourites, with Mercedes, the target team of the entire turbo hybrid era, for the first time, very much fighting to make up the gap. Red Bull are the favourites, Mercedes just behind. It's going to be a cracking year. Can't wait to share it with you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Hit that subscription button, hit that notifications bell, and we'll see you at the next one.